1. This happened during the first semester of my sophomore year in college. I was walking back from a lock-in retreat with an organization I'm in when everything occurred. The lock-in was being held at a church less than a mile from my apartment, so I asked my boyfriend if he could give me a ride so I wouldn't have to pay for parking, as my group met on campus originally 2 hours before the event, and then drove as a group to the church. The event lasted until 7 a.m., but I received permission to leave early, as I had an internship to be at around 6:30 a.m. My internship was in a city that was about an hour and a half away from where I go to college, so I left the church at about 4:15 a.m. so I could get back and not feel rushed while getting ready. I had planned on calling an Uber or something to drive me back to my apartment, since it was still dark out and it was really cold outside. I was having issues with my phone connecting to anything or getting a signal, so I couldn't call anyone to pick me up, and a lot of people were asleep, so I decided to just run to my apartment and be okay. Stupid, I know. But I figured since I only lived less than a mile away, nothing would happen. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag because it was freezing out, as I only had a light jacket on because a cold front came in. I left the church and was walking back to my apartment and decided to cut through a really well-lit public garage, because if I went to my left, there was the bar district that was a really roundabout way to get to my place, and to my right was a dark road and all the lamps were off. I started getting this weird feeling like I was being watched. I approached the garage, and I see this dark green van just sitting there in a spot, idling. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came over me, but something told me in the back of my head to not pass the van. By this time I was at the entrance of the garage, and I guess the person in the van saw me, so the van started backing out of the spot. I immediately turned around and ran. I went to the left of the garage towards the bar district and figured my best bet would be to get off the sidewalk and hide behind a pillar on the side of the garage. I was crouching behind the pillar when the dark green van pulls up outside of the parking garage, and a man gets out and starts whistling. I will never forget that whistling. From the spot I was hiding, I could vaguely see him walk out into the street and maybe look to see where I ran. When he turned around to get back into the car, I booked it. I ran so fast to the bar district that I can still remember how hard my heart was racing. I ran out of energy and decided to start walking. I passed a bar that looked like it was closing up, but it had been a little bit since I had seen the van and it was in a well-lit area. I was starting to think maybe I was overreacting and that I just had a hyperactive imagination. I still couldn't shake the feeling I had prior to when I first saw the van. I was passing an apartment complex when I heard a car turn on the street. It's 4:30 a.m. in a college town, so everyone is either passed out drunk or sleeping. So I turned around to look. I saw the green van turn onto the street I'm on, and is following me. It starts accelerating when it sees me. I'm still wrapped in my sleeping bag, which is a bright green color, by the way, so I'm not hard to miss. I'm freaking out inside, but my brain just tells me to walk calmly to the apartment complex I was right by, and act like I was pulling a key out as if I lived there to get into the gated area. The van is closer now and is starting to slow down when it reaches the area in front of the apartment. I'm so close to the gate, and I'm hoping the person won't call me on my bluff, as this wasn't my apartment and I had no way to get in if they decided to come after me. They slowed down to almost a stop, and at this time my hand is on the handle of the key access gate, and then the van just peels out and drives away, exiting onto a major street and out of sight. I didn't know if they would be back, and I didn't want to take my chances again with someone else, so I ran back to the bar that I saw was closing. I just started bawling and briefly explained my situation, asking if someone could walk with me to my apartment. A guy volunteers and walks me home. I got ready for my internship and am a little early, so I decided to drive to the area and see if I can spot the van again and maybe get its plates. I was too terrified before, and I didn't think to look for any type of identifying information other than get the hell out of there. I found nothing and decided to leave so I wouldn't be late. I did call the police on the non-emergency number, and they said they would send someone out to check the area. Later that day, I found out there had been a female my age that was attacked in the same area about an hour and a half after I was there. The guy had tried to force himself on her, but luckily a good Samaritan was close enough to realize what was happening and intervene. I'm not sure if it was the same person, but I really hope the girl is okay. And maybe if I had been more proactive with detailing the van to the police, I could have prevented that from happening to her. So guy with a dark green van, let's not meet. 2. This happened to me almost a decade ago as a sophomore in college in Manhattan. I am a female who grew up in New York, just outside of Manhattan. Though it wasn't until after my first year or two in college that I learned to be a typical New Yorker and stop engaging with strangers on the street. Though I did have at least one super cool experience with a stranger that I spent like 3 hours with and never saw again. But looking back on, I'm like, what on earth? How did you not get murdered? Sorry. Very long-winded way to say I was a pretty friendly girl who, especially when I first moved to the city, would happily respond to a stranger on the street. More often than not, it proved to be a bad idea. This particular time, though, I will never forget. It was scary, but even more strange. Onto the actual story. Sorry for this unnecessarily long intro. So I have just moved to a spot next to St. Mark's. I am pumped to decorate my place and decided I want to go to the flea market on Broadway to look for cool artwork. It's a short walk made longer by my wandering. As I wander in the direction I need to go, I end up walking next to a man who is probably a good 2 decades older than me. He's tall, tan, and otherwise nondescript. I don't know how the interaction started. I'm assuming it was with eye contact and a smile. First mistake. Then I willingly entered into a conversation with him. Why? He spoke English and Spanish, and for some reason I decided that I wanted to speak to him in Spanish, though I am not fluent, but know enough to carry a conversation. And as a dumb 19-year-old, must have thought I was fancy or something. I'm pretty sure the conversation was pretty innocent. I mean, I didn't know enough to let it get weird anyway. I think he eventually asks if he can come with me wherever I am going. And I laugh because I am a 19-year-old female and have no idea how to navigate a situation like this, and don't see how he could be serious. I eventually thought to tell him that he couldn't because I needed to be quick because company was coming, actually true too, even though I should have just said no, you're a strange older man, bye, and then put my headphones in and walked ahead. It seemed fine for maybe a minute. Then I feel eyes burning into the side of my head. Gah, what have I done? He wants to talk. I don't want to talk. I keep my headphones in, smile, why, and walk faster. Nope, he's still slightly behind me, walking briskly to keep up. I cross the street, he crosses the street. The flea market is in view, I think to myself, stupidly, that he's not going to follow, and if he does, it'll be easy to lose him in all the little booths. Finally, I'm at the flea market, and I duck right on inside. I don't see him follow, breathe a sigh of relief, and decide I can take a minute to browse. Even managed to pick up some cool skyline and typical New York pictures. As I'm wandering through each booth, I see him being buddies with one of the booth owners. He points to me. What? Well, so much for that sigh of relief. I've seen too many crime shows and decided that the best way to lose this guy is to zigzag around the flea market. Looking back, it's like, really? It's an outdoor flea market the size of a 2-bedroom apartment. You're not fooling anyone. I also decide to call my friend. We will call her Jen. I tell Jen that I need her to stay on the phone with me because some weirdo is following me, and if something happens, I need a witness. She's a bit worried and feels like, what the shit? I explain the interactions and how I'm working to dodge my way through the flea market to get home. She's half laughing at, half scolding me. I navigate my way out of the flea market undetected, or so I think, and start heading towards home. I don't see him or feel his stare. I start to think I'm in the clear. I tell Jen that I'm keeping her on the phone until I get home, and she agrees it's the best course of action. So I've been out of the flea market and walking down Broadway for about 3 minutes, and now Jen and I are engaging in normal conversations about life when, all of a sudden, something or someone grabs right at my ankle. I scream. I hear Jen going, "What is happening?" I turn around, horrified to see the man from earlier with a huge grin. He's crouched down on the ground. On his way up, he gleefully exclaims, "I'm a Chihuahua!" What? Jen is still in my ear yelling at me to let her know I'm okay, and I am standing in the middle of the sidewalk trying to process what on earth would possess a grown man to grab a strange woman's ankle and yell, "I am a Chihuahua." I honestly can't remember how I reacted. I'm pretty sure I just shook my head and ran away, literally ran away, down busy Broadway. You better believe there were multiple other people on the sidewalk too. Not one batted an eye. Like I said, this happened nearly a decade ago, so fortunately I have not met the Chihuahua again. But just for good measure, Chihuahua man, let's not meet. 3. My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so he took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I'd be, and there's poor cell reception inside. So he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her in her car seat to sit on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat them down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable gurgly toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she couldn't actually play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence explaining she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me? Put her down." As his panic mounted, she remained calm this entire time. But when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead, trying to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! 911! Help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction, and assumed he really was a kidnapper, a lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt, versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. Immediately a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up, and insisted she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and that he needed to lie and wait for police, and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show him the family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this manifested in him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone." Which of course everyone interpreted as him having either stalking photos or worse, pornographic images of the baby. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame the man considering what he thought was going on, kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point I was coming out of the store and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then that I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet pleading, "Take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone." And one of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him." And I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying he tried to abduct that woman's kid. I did not understand and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child. And we have 4 kids. If he were going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into a total ballistic tiger cub mode. I literally leapt out of my heels and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter, I've never even taken a self-defense class. So all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled with her. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth, and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I had watched the scene unfold. Within the next couple minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. A simple sampling. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members? They spent more time verifying the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband had called his brother, at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one ASAP who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home and we both just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband is seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do. He has 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, he did ask if he'd like to press charges, but considering the man was genuinely convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping, and stayed to talk to the police and apologize profusely when the truth became clear, he declined to press charges. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to the police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was really our baby. Parking lot kidnapper and parking lot skeptics, you better hope we don't meet. Edit. After hearing from everyone and weighing the pros and cons, we got in touch with the police and decided to move ahead with pressing charges against the 2 men involved in anything beyond basic restraint, to set an example that these men made the wrong decisions, even if they did come from a well-intentioned place. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 363, and thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Ooh, I'm seething after that last story. Not only would I be pressing charges against the guy that kicked me, but I'd sue the people that owned this store that didn't bother their fucking arse to help. I'd be suing the people that invented minivans and... Alright, well maybe not that, but you get the idea. Just such a frustrating read, so it's good to hear at the end that they're going to at least get a little bit of comeuppance. So irresponsible of them. And they couldn't even think, well, maybe we should check the guy's phone and see what these pictures are. No, they just immediately went to the bad place. Well, they will go to the bad place. Alright, deep breaths, calming down. Okay. Well, okay. As I record this, I currently stink. I was given a new ointment to put on my psoriasis skin. I've been kind of putting off using it, but I tried it last night and I still stink of petrol, or gasoline, depending on where you're from. I hope it works, because I ain't stinking like this for nothing. But as always, I'm dubious, so making plenty of changes to my diet, gradually of course. Do everything at once, I think you're kind of setting yourself up for failure that way. But I'm hoping, well, see, the thing is, they can't give me the phototherapy treatments again, because it was like less than a year ago I had them, and there's always risks involved with that. So, we're trying this ointment, we'll see how that does, then I'll see the dermatologist again on 25th of February. And fingers and toes crossed that it helps at least. I'm not expecting a complete cure. Although I have been watching videos. There was a guy, I've been watching videos on like people that have healed psoriasis and all that, you know. Hoping to find something maybe useful in there that I could try. And I found a few things. Green smoothies seem to help with skin problems. And in my case, I do notice a little bit of an improvement when I have green smoothies. So I'll have to get into the habit of having those. I've been kind of easing my way back into making use of my blender again. So we'll see what happens. But there was one video I watched, and this guy can apparently cure all sorts of things by just using certain types of diet. But he kind of lost me when he started talking about coffee enemas. I was like, yeah, I'm out. I don't really see how that's going to help, mate. But anyway, I'm off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.